Welcome to the definitive guide for optimization with Facebook ads. If you want to learn how to optimize your Facebook ads so that you can see more success, if you want to reduce your stress, if you want to scale results, if you want to scale your spend, if you want more stability, this is the place to be. We're going to talk about 4 super big topics in order. Number 1, we're going to talk about the breakdown effect. If you don't understand the breakdown effect, this is going to bust the myths of so many people trying to teach you how to hack Facebook and ultimately presenting a giant liability to your bottom line. Number 2, we're going to talk about thinking like a banker so that you can begin to make real change in your business. We're also going to talk about business goals, understanding what is my primary objective here. What am I actually trying to do instead of just making Facebook look good? How do I actually make a real change in my business instead of just feeding my ego and trying to take credit for everybody else on the team's work and the process and the systems that we have? And lastly, we're going to talk about short wins versus long-term goals. How do we give away trying to make the absolute most of today and actually focus on making the absolute most of our entire effort? If you want to know how to run Facebook ads, if you want to know what I'm doing to optimize my account, where I've been able to spend hundreds of millions of dollars, while my students and clients have done over $1 billion in revenue, you're in the right place. Let's go. First off, I just want to say thank you. I know you could be anywhere on the internet right now and I really appreciate it. I know that there's a lot of advice out there, and it has been overwhelming to me to see the flood of positive feedback and all of the success stories around the world. Hundreds of people in dozens of countries, 6 continents, nobody in Antarctica yet, but it's been wonderful, wonderful to see all the success that I've seen from folks over the last 3 or 4 months since this YouTube channel's really started to blow up. So I really appreciate it. If you love what you see here, please share it with somebody. Go ahead and hit subscribe. I think it's down over there. And most importantly, just if you find a lot of value out of this, feel free to ask questions. And if you really enjoy this stuff, subscribe and tell one. And if you want to know more about things, sign up for my classes. I always do a regular class all the time. It's at the apply.facebookdisruptor.com. And if you want to know about the Facebook Ads MBA program, where you can take an immersive 12-week course with one-on-one time, community, weekly classes, and a dynamic curriculum they'll have lifetime access to that updates on a weekly basis. You can, ask me more about it, and I'd love to hear more about that opportunity too. That all being said, let's dive into this, because I think that optimization on Facebook is absolutely important. And I think, honestly, most people that say what you're supposed to do are dead wrong. And honestly, the results show it. So let's get into it. Let's dive into optimization on Facebook, starting with the breakdown effect. So one of the things that people say is, well, why, when I'm looking at my results, why was Instagram so much more efficient than Facebook? Why is this lookalike audience so much better than broad? Why is this one ad so much better than another one? And you're looking at things the wrong way. So let's initially bust that, right? And this is going to get you away from the idea of trying to use a bunch of audiences or trying to hack placements or anything else. The breakdown effect is a really great way that Facebook is used to explain the blended average. And that's what we really need to focus in on. One of the things I hear all the time is, well, my broad audience is getting all the spend, but my lookalike is doing so much better. Why can't I spend all my money in my lookalike? And then what do? Well, you take out the broad audience, maybe using ABO, and you just throw a bunch of money at the lookalike audience, and then it stops working. And like, Facebook is broken. It won't do anything. Here's the thing. The reason that your results in the lookalike were good was because it only spent. Ultimately, there's not an infinite amount of people want to see your content. Remember, our content is a burden on the end user. So we have to keep in mind is that ultimately, Facebook is trying to deliver positive user experiences to those that are on their platform. Facebook cares about Facebook users way more than they care about your business. So if your business isn't predicated on trying to care about Facebook experiences, then you're going to struggle. Facebook isn't broken. You're just not respecting your relationship with your partner. And that's a really big. The breakdown effect is something where we say, well, 20 cents out of every dollar went to Instagram and it was 50% better than Facebook. Why don't we spend everything on Instagram? Then what happens when you spend 5 times as much on Instagram? Your performance goes down the toilet. And why? It's because ultimately Facebook cares about user experience. And what this really means is there might not be that many people on that platform available on that day that are interested in the right place of the funnel to the content that you have, that Facebook would rather show your content versus somebody else against the bid that you're willing to pay and the overall estimated action rate that your account has delivered. What I'm getting to here is our ads are almost always a burden on the end user experience. What you pay, your CPMs, are a direct reflection of your ability to not be a liability to Facebook's bottom line of ultimately trying to keep on the platform and wanting to come back. If your Facebook experience was just full of ads from everybody trying to force their content onto you because then that's all they would need to get you to buy, you would never sign on to Facebook ever again. So we have to remove this idea of performance marketing and instead move on this idea of a symbiotic relationship with our business partner. The breakdown effect shows what that allocation of resources is. And ultimately, instead of trying to chase the one little pocket that makes everything better, we have to understand that our success comes because of the aggregate. Because we spent some money abroad, because we got some money at the local, because we got some money on Instagram, because we got some money in the newsfeed. That is why we were way more successful. And the inverse of this, every time you try to say, I'm only targeting lookalikes, or I'm only going to do stories ads, or this is only going to go over here, we see far less success that's way less stable. And while we might get some immediate wins, it dies really, really fast. And it's because there's only so many people there that are ready, willing, and able to receive your content in a way where you are a better piece of inventory. You are a better piece of content for Facebook to deliver to an end user versus somebody else. And that's a really big thing to know. No matter how good you are, no matter how great your ads are, at the end of the day, nobody's signing on to Facebook to admire all of your hard work. And there's 20,000 other people trying to get that exact same impression when somebody refreshes or scrolls to their feed. Once we understand this, we can begin to focus in on the idea of really what we need to do is stop trying to optimize by audiences and really focus on our ads, because our ads do the targeting both on placement and with audience. So once we understand that, we can immediately begin to optimize our campaigns and our accounts by removing our efforts to hack the breakdown. And by breakdown, we're talking about delivery on placements, delivery to gender or audiences or ages or whatever else that we're trying to do. The more that we get away from trying to hack the machine, the better we are at aligning ourselves with Facebook's needs. Because the honest truth is, we don't really care where that money goes as long as we get a really stable result that we can prove. So with that in mind, we have to start thinking way less about trying to hack the breakdown and way more about trying to think like a banker and ultimately caring about the end user experience. We get those two skills together, we're going to be in a great. So thinking like a banker. One of the things we really have to focus in on when we're optimizing our ads and our accounts is not today's return. Remember, ROAS doesn't mean anything. MER is basically a lie. And what I mean by this is none of those numbers will ever tell you what happens when a customer buys a second. Right? So, my Facebook ads got it. Let's give an example, right? Let's say you spent $1,000 today and you got $3,000 in revenue. And the only platform you're spending on is Facebook. Fantastic. You got a 3 MER. Now, maybe on Facebook, you got $1,500 back for the $1,000 you spent. So you have a 1.5 ROAS. Okay. Now, what that really means is, though, $1,500 came from someplace else. Now, that might have been an email. It might have been just returning buyers. It might have been organic. It might have been a million other things that happened. Maybe people just liked the product and they came back and bought. Problem here is that doesn't actually tell you anything that you're supposed to do inside the system. You have no idea of, well, does that mean I spend more money on this ad? Do I target that audience? Because honestly, those results that happen today are a small piece. They're the tip of the spear of that customer journey. Now, what Facebook does is ultimately Facebook is priming and conditioning users to want to take actions over time. So it's not about just what can we get somebody to do today. Unless you are able to drive hundreds or thousands of transactions today, that it is not about today. What it's about is aligning yourself to be a better business partner with Facebook to ultimately get your content in the feeds of individuals. So what this means when we're talking about thinking like a banker is we have to stop looking at ROAS because it's meaningless. We have to stop looking at MER because honestly, ROAS and MER is a lot more about the media buyer taking credit for the work of a team, a system, and a process for an end net result. Because the Facebook ad that was shown today is rarely something somebody buys. How many times have you seen a Facebook ad where the very first time you saw it, you were like, this is amazing. I didn't know this thing ever existed. And I'm going to buy right now. The honest truth is, the answer to that is probably never, right? When you see an ad for shoes, did you not know shoes existed? The point is, Facebook knows that you've been in the market for shoes, right? Maybe it's, April. And every year around April, because Facebook has all your credit card information, seen everything that you've engaged with on the platform and seen all the websites you've gone to for the last decade. Every year around April, for the last 5 or 6 years, you seem to start talking about running and you're going to a lot of different stores. And we've seen that you've bought 1 or 2 pair of trainers in like this 5 or 6 week basis. And you've engaged with content from these types of people. You want to see that type of thing. So if I'm running a shoe brand and I show you an ad on cold prospecting, Facebook's already retargeting you because of all that. So the point here is thinking like a banker is we have to stop looking at ROAS and MER because it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Instead, we have to start looking at PSM, profitable scaling margin. Now, there's not a lot of people talking about PSM, and the honest truth is because agency owners are not aligned with brand owners when it comes to this type of thing. And most brand owners aren't informed enough about this type of stuff. And the people that are absolutely crushing on it don't teach. So let's fix that. PSM is lifetime value divided by the sum of CPA and COGS. How much does it cost to acquire a sale? And how much is that customer worth to you? What this really means is if you're promoting 3 or 4 or 5 different offers and products in your store, how many of them are giving you a good ROAS versus how many of them are giving you a lifetime value way above and beyond what you're paying to acquire that customer? If you want to generate revenue growth in a long-term basis, it's far less about, can I take 5 cents on the dollar today after you break down cost of goods and you pay for all the other teams and you dedupe all the attribution that's happening because your Facebook sale also might have had something to do with a Google ad spend that also had something a little bit to do with some TikTok ad spend. And yeah, there was an email that went out today and 20 people bought again today. The point is, if you can understand what product ultimately allows you to have the greatest margin between the cost to acquire the customer, the cost to make the product, plus what that customer is worth over their lifetime with you and the brand, finding which one of those has the greatest margin will ultimately allow you to understand which offer, product, or service to actually promote. Because there are basically 2 primary objectives in business, which gets us down to our biggest point here is either we are trying to drive volume of customers at break even or small profit, or we're trying to generate volume of high margin customers. And what I really mean by this is either we're dealing in volume. We are a bulk business. We want to get 100 customers today, and if we make $10 on each one, hey, we made $1,000 today. Do that every single day, and we're going to stack up very short wins, and we're going to make a little bit of money on a whole lot of people, and that's going to get us cash flow, get a market share. We're going to grow the business. But ultimately, hand-to-hand combat like that is going to be something that tremendously inhibits our ability to scale the brand. Because we're going to be able to grow the business, sure, but there's a law of diminishing returns of how much we're going to be able to do that. And because we're making very little money on those transactions, if competitors come into the space, if we are unable to figure out the rest of the business, and if our creative kind of slips, or if the market price of that inventory goes up, say it's summer and people don't want to buy as much anymore, or it's winter and everybody's giving discounts, you go from a low margin, high volume business to losing money every single day. That's an extremely volatile place to be. Whereas you might be able to invest in high margin customers. Yes, I'll pay you $50. I'll pay $50 to make a sale today for something that cost me $50 to make. Now, theoretically, if I'm charging $50 for that product, it cost me $50 to make it. I spent $50 to produce the product, and I got $50 in return. I lost $50 in that transaction. But what if that customer is ultimately worth $300 to me here? I paid $100 to get $300. So I now have $200, $250 more in revenue coming off of that customer over the next 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, whatever. If I understand that margin, I can begin to buy into that margin. And ultimately, if I acquire more of those customers, I might be losing money today, but I'm going to make way more money long term. And when I'm talking about thinking like a banker, the optimization of our ad account is really understanding what is the balance between needing immediate money today and the willingness to invest in long-term growth tomorrow. One of these is going to grow your business massively, and one of them is going to be a lot of hard work to keep the lights on today. Now, I'm not here to tell you which one's the right move, but I will say that you're promoting 5 products and 3 of them are in the middle. Those are probably the worst things for you to make money on, because ultimately you are training Facebook to value those things the same as what they're valuing everything else, because Facebook doesn't know the difference between each purchase. Each customer that's coming to your store is basically getting treated as, will this person buy or will they not? And because you're spending money in a bunch of different places, all having different business objectives, you're keeping Facebook super dumb. Remember, Facebook is your employee. You're the manager. The more things you ask your employee to do, the dumber your employee is going to be. Or you just hire a whole bunch of people and you spend far less time training any of them. Both of those things ultimately will lead you to a path towards failure when your other option could be success. Now, I'm not saying that promoting a bunch of ideas is bad. I'm saying that if you think like a banker and understand, do we need volume or do we need revenue growth, you're ultimately going to start to prioritize your efforts, which will optimize your account, because you can stop spending money on things that ultimately don't move your bottom line. And it's all about the hyperbole here. That's the unfair truth. And I can promise you, you're not spending nearly enough money to need a second or a third product. If you're not spending $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a day, you probably don't even need a second. So when we're talking about business goals, what we need to get to is understanding what our objectives here. Now, we talked about thinking like a banker, right? Understanding what we're doing. So we've already optimized out with the breakdown effect. We've understanding that we've stopped trying to hack placements, right? We've stopped trying to hack audiences, right? Hopefully what happens out of all of this is you just go broad and you're using only auto placement because you feel like working extra hard to make success more difficult for your brand is kind of a bad move. Why would you want to do that? I don't know, but a lot of people think that's a really great idea because they don't understand how the system works. We just already debunked all of that. And we've now gotten down to, because we're thinking like a banker, the 1 or 2 offers we absolutely need to best meet our business objectives here. Probably 1 offer. Now, with that, what we need to understand is, what are our business? Is our business goal to maintain our LTV? And obviously, we are going to struggle as Facebook advertisers to reduce the cost of goods. So the only way we're going to make more money is either by increasing the volume of people or reducing the CPA. Now, if we want to reduce the CPA, that's a fairly simple process. We creative test our way using dynamic ads and broad audiences and continue to lower our average CPA. We're not spending all of our money against the thing with the lowest and then complaining when it breaks, because like the breakdown effect showed us, the reason something did really well generally has far more to do with the fact that you didn't ask it to do a lot of work. So when we're thinking about our business goals, reducing CPA or increasing volume of spend generally is the 2 moves that we're really. Now, when we're scaling spend, one of the biggest mistakes people make is they say, well, my target is $50 CPA. I hit $50 CPA, and I'm just going to scale to the moon. I'm going to surf whatever today, and I'm going to try to get the most out of it. Well, remember, that number today isn't necessarily a real number, because that data is incomplete. And you're also building that on taking credit for other people's work. It is way more about, what was your average this week? Was it better than last week? What was your average versus last month? And in that way, what we can do is start to understand, what is the Facebook side CPA versus our overall blended CPA. And this is why Facebook attribution not necessarily being 100% isn't really a concern. For years, we didn't have attribution. And then Facebook took too much credit. And now it's not taking enough credit and it's broken. What if it's just now being honest? What if it actually doesn't even matter? Because the Facebook CPA is relative to the overall blended CPA of your business. And all you need to know is, as long as Facebook says it's a 50, I know I'm really getting about a 35 and I'm good. So what's our business goal? Is to establish what that platform allowable CPA is and then beat it. If our goal is a $50 CPA and we get down to a 45 net average week over week, that means we can immediately increase our spend by 10%. Why? Well, because of the breakdown effect, and because we're thinking like a banker, we understand that maybe that average we get is because of the available inventory and the people that we're seeing. So if we can spend 10% more money and get 0 more sales and we're still okay, we can do it. And if we get our $50 target, but we're actually coming in at 45, 10% more would be $49.50. Well, that's still 50 cents cheaper on every single transaction on average than what our target is. So we're still making money. Now, odds are, as we scale our spend into that margin, we're probably going to see a few more sales from Facebook. And odds are, you are absolutely going to see more direct traffic, right? And more organic and source none if you're using Google Analytics. Whatever. There are good uses for it, but you should never be using UTM to try to understand. And you're also going to see better email open rate. You're going to have more email addresses. You're going to see more search volume. Because you're generating more intent in the ecosystem, you are going to see a lift. This is incremental lift from your marketing efforts across all channels. So while that number before was a 50 and we've got it now to a $49.50 because we're generating more incremental lift, we might have to reestablish that number. Maybe it goes to a 51 or a 52 or 55, which means we can spend more money. And the reason we can do that is because that Facebook CPA in relation to overall CPA, total amount spent across our business versus total conversions that we got, on the offers that we've already defined because of our PSM, we're either pushing for volume or we're pushing for profit margin per customer journey. We're now in a situation where we can say, well, that was the case when we were spending 500, but now they're spending 2,000 a day. Facebook doesn't need to be nearly as good because we're seeing way more sales from search. We're seeing way more sales from email. We're seeing way more returning customers. So Facebook has brought incremental lift to the situation because more and more people are seeing us on a regular basis. And because of that, Facebook doesn't need to work nearly as efficiently because it's fueling the fire of our business. Because Facebook should not ever be the only source of income you ever have. Because hopefully, at the absolute worst case scenario, your product is good enough that people want to come back and you're sending a few emails. Anytime somebody makes a purchase that's not Facebook click related, that means that you can spend more money on Facebook to acquire more people. And what I mean by this, I'll break it down one last simple time if I can. If I made $1,000, if I needed to make $1,000, and that comes from 20 sales, and that's a $50 CPA. If instead I made like 25, 30 sales, and I generated like $1,200, $1,500 in revenue, that means is I could legitimately actually spend closer to $60, $70 on Facebook side CPA, because I know that I'm generating revenue from other sources, and I know that Facebook is driving intent and awareness in the marketplace. I'm ultimately monetizing in other ways. So because of that, Facebook is the amplification to a successful business. I don't need Facebook to be nearly as profitable. Some of the most successful businesses I know run Facebook at a 0.8. Hell, I'm running one at 0.4. $30,000 a day in spend, because the rest of the business model and the system and process and team we have in place monetizes that attention. We're not solely dependent on Facebook. And Facebook's not necessarily taking credit for everything that's coming its way. And because we know Facebook is a computer algorithm, it's going to make the same mistakes over and over again. It's going to repeat the same process over and over again. So that relative number between Facebook CPA on a weekly basis to our store blended CPA on a weekly basis, more or less going to be relative. And if that number changes, that means is the incremental lift that we're seeing from Facebook has also changed. So that being said, let's get to short wins versus long-term growth. The number one biggest mistake I see people make when trying to optimize their campaign is trying to chase whatever was successful today or this week. I've seen people with 5, 6, 20 campaigns live, right? Where they're running ABO and interest groups and cost caps and all this stuff. And I get it. That makes Facebook look, but it could look the same or better focused on long-term growth. My point here is, if you're trying to maximize $500 a day and it takes a couple hours a day of day trading using cost caps and lookalikes and ABO and surfing and all of that stuff, you're going to work really, really hard to maybe make $1,000, $2,000 today. And in which case, mazel tov to you for that. However, if instead of that, you figured out every single way that you never had to rely on those again, 3 months, you might be spending $2,000 a day. Short wins inhibit long-term growth because ultimately you're not building a scalable system. You're rewarding yourself for hard work instead of training the machine to do all the hard work for you. The idea here is, when we're optimizing a campaign, when we're optimizing an account, what we need to also understand after everything else is, what of these efforts doesn't need me? How do I empower that thing to be as successful as possible? And once we figure that out, then we're never going to have to work nearly as hard again. It is astonishing to me that the leaders in the Facebook ads marketing thought space aren't teaching people how to work a couple hours. Instead, they're teaching people how to make the most money they possibly can today, which might be the reason they're not in business. Think about that. And I hope that this was eye-opening and it's something that you can run to the bank with, because honestly, you deserve it. So that being said, YouTube thinks you might like this video. There's a playlist over here, or maybe it's vice versa. Who knows? And go ahead and subscribe over there. Until next time, I'll see you on the internet. Bye.